Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Parent Doctor podcast. This is a bonus episode based on a webinar that I hosted at the end of October 2024. It is all about how to prepare ourselves and our children for their first smartphones. Now, since smartphones were introduced, almost 20 years ago, can you guys believe that? The first smartphones came out, I think, in 2007, 2008 with the iPhone. We've learned a lot about what these devices can do, and it's pretty darn amazing. The computer power in a cell phone today, a smartphone, is more than the computer power that sent astronauts to the moon in 1969. So if that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. But along with that power comes a lot of responsibility. And for us as parents who are boomers, Gen X, millennials, a lot of what our kids are going to be exposed to is stuff that we ourselves are only just learning. So it's very important that we take a proactive approach to preparing ourselves, educating ourselves, and being thoughtful about how we're going to make this decision and what the expectations will be for our kids, because we want to set them up to be able to use technology as a tool that serves them and to prevent them from being controlled by or negatively influenced by that technology, keeping in mind that so much that's on there these days in terms of apps, games, pornography, social media, all of this stuff is meant to be addictive. And it's really on us to teach our kids how to set limits so that they can have a healthy relationship with this device that could do so much for them, but also could have a very negative influence in their lives. I hope that you enjoy this webinar. If it's appealing to you, I want to also welcome you to an upcoming cohort of parents working with me. I call it the EPIC groups. So this stands for Empowered Parent Inner Circle. And a few times a year, I open the doors to this program. It's not super cheap. It's not super expensive. The cost is $2,497 for 6 weeks of intensive coaching with me on Zoom and 6 months of WhatsApp access to me and a growing community of supportive, empowered parents who are going to have your back. It's a lot of fun. I promise you're going to grow and learn so much if you choose to work with me. The ideal time to do this is when your kids are between the ages of 5 and 12, before they're hitting adolescence. But even if you have an adolescent child, it can be very beneficial to you to join this program. It's going to be starting the first week in December. We'll go for 3 weeks in December, and then we'll take a break the last week in December and go for 3 weeks in January. So you'll get even an extra couple of weeks with the holidays of the access to the WhatsApp group and the community group. If you like that, great. Please go to epic.theparentdoctor.com. All right, without further ado, let's get to that webinar. Here it is.
All right, so I'm admitting, and if he comes after me, I will apologize, but I stole a lot of the slides from Jonathan Haidt's talk, so I'm going to be sharing that with you guys in case any of you missed it. The thing that I really took away with it from his discussion is that the experience of childhood is really vastly different for Gen Z than it even was for millennials. And technology up until millennial kids really had overall a positive impact on their learning, their academics, their social growth, and their overall well-being. But within the last 10 years, things have dramatically shifted, and now there's a lot of evidence, particularly because of these things, right? Because they're portable, they're in our hands, they're in our pockets, they're in front of our eyeballs all the time. These really can have a negative impact, especially on kids. And so as a child psychiatrist and a child development expert, I want to help you all understand so that you can feel strong in your firm and loving stance as the CEO of your family, as your kid leader, in making decisions that are going to be hard decisions sometimes because you're going to be against your kids. Overall, we all want the same thing. We all want our kids to ultimately be able to use technology in a way that helps them. And these things are amazing. Let's face it. I mean, my smartphone can do more than the computers that took the astronauts to the moon in 1969. Yours too. I mean, it's incredible. The computing power that's in there, the communication power, everything is really awesome. But it is something that can be used for good or not so good. And we really need to be prepared to have conversations with our kids about topics that we wouldn't otherwise have, I think, in the past until they were much older, at a much younger age now, because of the possibility of them interacting with their own smartphone or other kids' smartphones without adult supervision. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And full disclosure, I'm presenting this to you because I have a new cohort of my parenting coach program, which starts on November 6th. And if any of you are interested in that, I'll give you information at the end about it. But this is meant to be educational, and I hope that you take something useful away from it and share it with any friends. All right, so let's see. Here's where he talked about the decline of a play-based childhood. And again, I see this and I've thought about why is it? I live now in Los Angeles, which is a very urban area. I grew up in New Hampshire in a town of 14,000 people where we spent a lot of time playing in the woods behind our house. Obviously, therefore, my kid's experience as a child is very different than mine was. But it's not just that locational difference and physical environment difference. It's also the fact that kids growing up in 2024 are not playing as much outside, even if they live in a place where they could play outside. Our cultural mindset has really shifted. And this was in one of the books that we read recently called How to Raise an Adult by Julie Lithcott-Hames. I have a monthly book club, which if any of you are not in, feel free to join. It's also free. I read and present and summarize a book each month. But she talked about how in the 1980s, I forget the young man's name. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name, but there was a boy who was abducted and his face was on all the milk cartons. And it really started this kind of pandemic level fear among parents of kids' safety and child abductions. The reality is that our kids are safer now than they were in the 1970s and 80s by a lot. But still, we feel that it's not responsible as a parent to send our kids out and about in the world. Even a mom who let her child go play at the park while she was just like a 6-minute walk from home and had a phone to call mom if she needed it. The mother ended up getting arrested in 2014 in North Carolina while she was working a shift at McDonald's. So we definitely have this pressure on us as parents to be there. And then we get criticized if we're being helicopter parents. So we feel like we can't win because on the one hand, we're being told we need to let our kids be more free. At the same time, we're afraid to do that because we might face legal repercussions at worst or the judgment of our peers at best. So how do we walk this fine line? We'll be talking about that a little bit here, but that's something that we really dive into in the coaching. All right, the rise of a phone-based childhood. These timelines are really important. The iPhone came out in 2007. This was the year I started residency. I still remember sitting next to my friend, Cage Hall, and he had the first iPhone. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. But I didn't convert to getting a smartphone for a few years after that, I think. I was a late adopter of all this technology. I think Facebook for me started around 2008 when I first started using Facebook. I actually kind of flirted with my husband, now husband, on Facebook. That's how we first started talking to each other. But the social media explosion really started 2010 to 2012. And again, when he was giving this talk, Jonathan Haidt kind of explained that like up until this point, computers and technology, all those things were just felt to be beneficial for our kids' learning and their development. So it was natural for parents to give their kids smartphones. And again, we didn't really know what social media was, and so we didn't know what the potential risks would be. So again, there was just this kind of lack of knowing what could happen and what it was that we were giving our kids. And there was a ton of peer pressure for parents because truly, kids would tell them, all the kids in my school have this. All the kids at my school have Instagram. And it was true because there weren't parents who were really restricting the use at this point. So from 2012 on, there was dramatic adoption of this technology and smart social media by kids on their smart devices. Dramatic increased hours interacting with their phones and friends via text rather than face-to-face time. And then in 2015 was when they introduced the first front-facing camera and selfies became a thing and selfie sticks and all that stuff. And there's actually a book written by Michelle Borba. We might read it next year in the book club called Unselfie, but it's all about how this new way of viewing yourself and how that has become socially acceptable has really made us as a society. Young people are more self-centered, more narcissistic, less empathic, partly as a result of this like selfie culture, which has become so normalized. So now it's on us as parents to really intentionally fight against that through encouraging our kids to do different things that help them think of themselves as givers, as selfless, as people who make a difference in the world, and not just people who look good on Instagram. All right, so this slide is from Jonathan Haidt's talk. Daily average time with friends. This is data from the American Time Use Survey. If you look at these each color is a different age group. So older age groups down here, we're adults. We don't spend that much time socializing with friends anymore. But for kids, this is absolutely an essential part of their social development. Their brains need this. And again, up until about 2012, so when that social media stuff really took off, the iPhone was introduced here, but really it was around 2012 that we saw this dramatic and precipitous decline in the number of hours per day, that kids ages 15 to 24 are spending fewer minutes a day with friends, to the point that now the average 15 to 24-year-old is not spending that much more time than the average older adult is with friends. And generally, this is to their detriment, right? Kids really do need to kind of know and learn from each other. And I don't know about you, but when I'm around young people now and I notice how they're interacting with each other, it's not uncommon to look at a group of high school students or college students, and all of them are there like on their devices, or the shared experience is them texting each other something. And again, it's not that that is bad necessarily, but it's the opportunity cost of not also having face-to-face interactions and developing those social skills. So he talked also about how we tend to be overprotective of our kids in the real world, as we talked about helicopter parenting, not wanting our kids to take risks, like go to the park by themselves, overscheduling them in supervised activities. But at the same time, we tend to be underprotective of them in the digital world. And in part, that was because we didn't know. And again, for most of us, we are building the plane as we fly it when it comes to leading our kids in their safe use of digital technology, because many of us don't know what these apps are and they're changing so fast. I told a funny story. I don't remember if it was in this group last time or somewhere else, and this is kind of embarrassing for me, but when I was working at Kaiser Permanente, this mother brought her like 15-year-old daughter in, and she was dealing with some online bullying. And the mom, I interviewed the mother and the child separate, and she told me like, oh, her friends just said something mean. Like she saw her friends texting each other, like, have you seen her TikToks? They're so cringe. And I didn't know what TikTok was at this time. I think it was like 2018. And I was like, what does that mean? What are TikToks? Boop? And the mom was like, no, TikTok, and I was like, no, I don't know. What is it? So again, like, we just don't know. So she knew because her daughter was using it. But I think many parents, it's very easy to imagine you would give your child a smartphone. There's going to be, a couple of years ago, it was TikTok. There's inevitably going to be some new app. You're going to think you understand what it is, and you may, but you may not understand all the sneaky ways that it ends up insidiously being problematic. So we'll talk more about this, and I don't mean to scare you all straight. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm also not trying to be political in any way and tell you how you have to raise your kids. I just want you to have the information and be thoughtful so that you can make the decision that feels right for you, because I also know each of you has a different child. And as a child psychiatrist, again, I'm very aware that I've seen the worst case scenarios, right? I see the people who come to me because their kid got involved with a pedophile online without knowing it. I've seen like the bad people in the world, the bad players, and the results and impacts that it can have on kids. I've seen kids who get cyberbullied and become suicidal. So none of us want that for our kids. We all want the best. And the reality, though, is that any of our kids could be victimized in that way. So before giving them access to a smartphone, I think we have to be very thoughtful about what it is that we're doing. And the analogy that I like to use when talking to parents about this is like when we taught our kids to swim. It was not a like, one day you're not in the pool, the next day you're a swimmer and I'm not observing you, right? It's a stepwise process where first you are watching people swim, then you're trying it in the shallow end with floaties. Then you're trying it in the shallow end without the floaties, but with me nearby as you practice. Then you're taking swim lessons in the shallow end where you can still stand up. Then you're going to the deeper end while I'm still near you or with a floaty. Then you're going in the deep end with me still around watching you. And eventually, maybe by the time you're 16, 17, 18, you have enough experience in the pool that when we're on vacation and you ask if you can go to the hotel pool alone, I will feel comfortable saying yes. I think that is a very similar analogy to the smartphone use of our children. Ultimately, the goal is that they can use a smartphone responsibly, independently, and for their betterment. But it's going to take a long time to get there. It is not a binary decision. It's not a matter of how old does my kid need to be. That's not the right question to be asking. All right. Again, this was taken from Jonathan Haidt's thing, in a phone-based childhood versus a play-based childhood before phones. Our social skills are limited by screen-mediated communication. So kids get good at, I see this with my daughter. When I FaceTime her, she doesn't just want to talk to me. She wants to use the iPhone filter so she can be a shark. And I get that it's fun. But at the same time, we're not communicating so much when we've got this like mouse face or shark face or unicorn face and we're just playing. It's playing, but it's not the deep connection we would have if we were face to face with one another. Creativity, there's a lot of data now, and this is going to be coming up in this month's book club, Thrivers by Michelle Borba, that same author who wrote Unselfie. We have seen less creativity in kids in recent generations, in part because academically, we are driving them more towards tests and giving them less creative time. And then also online, they're getting less opportunities for full-fledged creativity. Although these devices can be used in creative ways, overall, a lot of the time is spent in like passive activity, games, etc. And then physical health, we'll talk more about this, but when we are on screens, and this is true for adults and kids, right? We're spending a lot more time overall, most of us, on screens, whether it's a computer screen, an iPad screen, a tablet screen, or our smartphones. And that has changed our bodies. So we'll be talking about that. It also leads to less movement, which increases risks of weight gain, metabolic syndrome, etc. And so our kids are going to be in this new generation where they're going to have to be much more mindful of what they eat, moving their bodies, stretching, counteracting physically the effects of being hunched over and looking down all the time. And we have to kind of lead them not with a guilt trip, but with our own modeling and inspiration. So we want to strike a balance. Screen time limits are relatively easy to do when you have a young kid and it's a tablet and it's a device that you can take away or put an app on it that's going to limit their use. Once you give your child a smartphone, I can tell you from experience, regardless of what the plan was ahead of time or the contract you signed with your child was ahead of time, when you have a preteen or a teenager with their own device, you are going to have problems getting that device away from them. It's just not as easy as it is with a computer or a tablet because it's small, it's personal, it feels like it belongs to them, and they are going to resist giving it up to you. So setting screen time limits, setting limits on where the device will be used, when it will be used, that's something that you really need to do ahead of your child ever getting their first phone. And even more importantly, you have to start modeling that yourself because otherwise you are a hypocrite. If you are allowed to have your smartphone in bed reading until 11 p.m., or if you are allowed to have your smartphone at the dinner table, but the rule for your kid is something different, you will lose their respect. So we really need to be thoughtful as families and think about, okay, what is the right time for us to be using this? Where is it going to plug in at the end of the day? What is the place where it can be used and the place where it can't be used? And then digital safety education, we're going to talk about this a little bit more. This is one of the pieces of a course that I created. It's an 8-week course. Every week has about 7 different small snippets. One of the small snippets I'll be showing you, so it's like one of 50 something, is about this, is about going through the steps of preparing your kids for a smartphone. And then the other thing we all can do more of, I know I definitely can, is outdoor exploration, finding time each day, each week to be outdoors with our kids without devices. This is physically important for them to move their bodies. It's important for their eyeball development so they don't get myopia from always focusing on things that are too close. But it's also just important for their relationship with you, and nature itself is therapeutic. Okay, here is what I think most of us forget. When we're thinking about giving our kids access to a smartphone, specifically I'm talking about smartphones, not flip phones, not iWatches or Apple Watch, whatever they're called, anything that's directly connected to the internet, and specifically anything that has apps that are going to be like social media apps, Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, all of those things. We have to have conversations with our kids earlier than we would otherwise have. I'll give you an example. Here in California, in Beverly Hills, a few months ago, there was a news article in LA Times about some middle school boys who took a video of a peer, a girl at their middle school, and used an AI app to, and this is apparently very easy to do, to basically, there's apps that will take off a person's clothes and make them naked. And then that student can then share that image with the whole school, right? And in this case, they took this image of this girl or video of this girl and put it in a pornographic video that it looked like a deep fake video. So it looked like she was in this pornographic video. And then they thought it was hilarious and they shared it with all their friends and they got expelled. So my son at the time was 11, but I realized like, this is a conversation I need to have with him. Now, we've had general conversations about where babies come from, but we hadn't yet even had the talk about what is sex. And one day we were alone together and I was like, Calvin, I need to talk to you about something. It's a little uncomfortable, but I basically gave him the conversation, bare basics about what is sex and what is pornography, and that this had happened at this middle school. And I told him, I was like, I just want you to be aware because you and your friends are entering this time where things are going to seem really funny sometimes and your brain is going to think it's great or a good idea to do something like share that image with someone or even create that video. But you have to realize and think about the impact that has on that other person. And we talked about, what do you think it was like for that girl? Like, how would you feel if a video that wasn't of you, but it looked like it's you naked having sex with someone, like, and he was just appalled. And I think I might have shocked him a little too early because he's only 11. But here's the thing. I know he goes and spends the night with a couple of his friends. I know that their parents allow iPads and TVs in the room. I know it's just a matter of time before he's going to see pornography on someone's device somewhere. And so I'd rather have that conversation early than wait too long. And I want him to really understand this because he is a responsible kid so that he can hopefully be the voice of reason and prevent in the coming years any incidents like that among his friend group. But this is not a conversation I want to have. And I'm sure it's not a conversation that you all want to have with your kids either. But we have to have these conversations. Otherwise, our kids are unprepared. We're throwing them in the deep end of the pool without proper preparation and making it very likely that bad things are going to happen. I mean, it's quite likely anyway, even if we prepare them, because in adolescence, our kids' brains are hardwired to overestimate rewards and underestimate risks. Now, I'm not saying that what those preteen middle school boys did was okay in any way, shape, or form. But I am saying that I can understand why their brains thought that was hilarious in the moment, but they don't yet have the development of their prefrontal cortex to understand what the outcome is going to be, like how their action to share that with the world is going to impact the person that was in that video. They don't yet have that ability developed very well. So again, was it wrong? Absolutely. Did they make a mistake? Absolutely. Is it an understandable mistake for a kid their age who is unprepared? Absolutely. So I think it's on us really as parents to make sure that we are thinking about that and understanding that even if our kids are bright and responsible kids, they still will make mistakes when they hit adolescence in some way or form that will be shocking to us. But if we know that that's likely to happen, we can react with love and compassion instead of anger. All right. Number 2, drugs. I have seen many teenagers who have gotten into problems with drug use, specifically vaping. And I have a whole video about vaping. If you don't understand what vaping is, welcome to the club. Again, this is something that really only came out in the last few years. Vapes became very popular in 2015 and beyond. Here in California, where marijuana is legalized, it's the primary way that young people now use marijuana. And it is much riskier for adolescent brains because the THC content of vaped marijuana is over 95%, whereas the THC of smoked plant is usually never more than like 25%. So they're getting very, very potent THC. And I've seen really severe mental health sequelae in kids, suicidality, severe anxiety, insomnia, inability to eat, psychosis, bipolar disorder, bad things. So it's really important that we talk to our kids about vaping, that they understand the risks. Many kids use Snapchat as a way to connect with drug dealers, and many drug dealers infiltrate child and teen groups to try to sell their products. So again, this is a conversation that you need to have with your kids ahead of time so that you know that's a potential risk. We already talked about pornography. We all know it's all over the internet. We all know it's a matter of, again, when, not if our kids encounter it. And I think having those conversations with them beforehand need to happen. And again, if you don't feel comfortable having the conversation with your child about pornography, that's okay, but that's a red flag and a sure sign that they should not have access to a smartphone. Pedophiles, catfishing. I've had many patients who were groomed from the age of like 9 and up, sometimes even older girls like 17, 18, who you would think would be smart enough to understand this, but people aren't always who they seem to be online. And sometimes bad people are very patient and they will really groom their victims for even months, like make them fall in love with them. They will do all kinds of things to get naked pictures of your kids. And then those pictures are out there in the world and police will tell you there's nothing they can do because they can't trace these criminals. They use, I don't even understand, but they can hide their tracks digitally. So again, kids need to really understand that sharing data, sharing images, especially sharing any private or sexual images, needs to basically be assumed that you're sharing that with the entire world. And we can give examples from famous people, right, of people that's happened to and make them really think about that. I think telling stories about other people you know that this has happened to or stories that you've heard about will be more effective than lecturing to them about why they should do it themselves. They need to kind of imagine themselves in someone else's shoes. All right, almost last, real world violence. We all know this. human beings can be incredibly cruel to other human beings. This has been true since the beginning of time. But what's changed in our modern world is that instead of the news portraying the worst of the worst to presumably an adult audience late at night, now we get graphic images that can be delivered by a social media instantaneously, and there's no filter. And I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to see a beheading, and I certainly don't want my kids seeing a beheading. And it's really something that can be traumatic to our children's sense of safety. And there's little wonder in my mind as a psychiatrist that anxiety levels are through the roof because a lot of what kids can see online is real world violence and it makes them feel hopeless. So again, these are conversations we need to have when it feels appropriate. You need to listen to your gut about when that feels appropriate, not rush it just so that you can get your kid a phone. I'm not saying to rush it, but this is something to think about before giving your child their own phone. Again, I think it's easier with certain apps. I use Custodio with my son. I use Bark with my daughter. I monitor the websites they go to. I block YouTube. Like, I think there are more things you can do in your home with a Wi-Fi connected device. But once you give your child a smartphone that has, what is it called? I don't know, like the internet all the time from the cellular companies, I don't know if you can block it anymore. And even if you could, I'm sure by that point your child is smart enough that they can get around it. I just assume that my kids are better at all this stuff than I am anyway. And then finally, it's the permanency of everything our kids do online. So again, this is something where I'm learning more and more about AI and becoming really concerned about what it's going to mean for our children. So there is now an app called Crystal Knows. I learned about it at an AI conference I attended last week, and I installed it. It's a free Google Chrome extension. And what it does somehow is it takes a person's email address and any emails that you've written to them and they've written to you. And I think it also searches any social media, LinkedIn profiles, other things that they find online that seem to be from the same person. And then it gives you a DISC, which is a personality assessment. And it tells you kind of how you should direct a conversation with this person if you're in sales, or how you should write an email to them to make them feel respected. It's wild. But what I was thinking is for our kids, like when they go to apply to college, is the college going to be able to just run something like this and basically find, I don't think it's any more going to be a manual thing of let's check this kid's Instagram and see if they're appropriate, or do they have a TikTok? Is it like, okay? Or is there anything here we should be concerned about, whether it's an employer or a college or anything? I think soon there's going to be AI programs that basically give someone's entire internet history to the person who's making the judgment call. So I have to think that our kids' performance and the things that they do online are going to follow them for a long time, which is another reason that I'm really planning to wait as long as possible before giving my kids any social media accounts or any way to post things online, and certainly before they get access to an independent smartphone that would make it very easy for them to do those things. But again, remembering like the examples I gave earlier, sexting, text messages, we have to assume that kids are going to share these things like wildfire, and anything that they say or do or post online is going to be tied back to them. So we really have to train them to be very professional and respectful. And this is where the work that we do, especially in the 5 to 12 years with our kids, is so important to help them have a strong sense of their own values, why they behave a certain way, and to be integrated with that idea of who they are so that their behavior will naturally follow and it won't be hard for them to behave in a way that makes them proud and makes you proud. All right, so how do we kind of rewind the momentum that built up from 2007 until recently that gave all kids phones such that now 70% of 12-year-olds have smartphones in America? The recommendations from Jonathan Haidt are community engagement, create safe places for kids to play, organize neighborhood events, foster intergenerational connections. So really make sure that we are keeping kids engaged in a community. He recommends policy changes, and we are seeing this. I live in California. There's now new rules about cell phones in the classroom for all public schools, and private schools are implementing that more strongly as well, which I'm very happy to see. But we want digital privacy laws. We want preventing kids from having smartphones in the classroom. We want to have more outdoor time in our schools. We want to make sure that there's safe places for our kids to play. And then we want to make sure that we're embracing technology mindfully. I'll share with you guys when I share this replay video, a link that I also give in my course to having basically a contract, a thoughtful PDF that you can complete with your children, regardless of their age. And they have different ones for different age kids to think about these technology questions and have you really have a game plan in place with your family about your kids' use of technology. Okay, this was some scary data again from Jonathan Haidt's talk. This is standardized testing, reading, and math results in America from 1971 to 2023. And what he was really emphasizing was there was a steady increase, especially in mathematics, over that time period, and a steady, slighter increase in reading. And now the trend from 2012, again, the year that social media really took over, has been this general decline, such that we're now pretty much back to the 1970s in terms of kids' academic achievement. So our kids' intellect overall, maybe not your kid or my kid, but overall seems to be declining in a way that correlates with increased smartphone use. This is a test. The PISA score is a test of, again, a standardized test, but it looks at kind of creative thinking. In general, the US has scored statistically worse than other developed nations. Finland kids tend to score the best. But again, this is data from the US, and we see even in this creative thinking, kids' scores are dramatically declining from 2012 to 2022. He talks about, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, so education decline, we just discussed physical deformities. I'm going to show you in the next slide. Happiness decline, mental illness increase. We'll show you that data as well. Suicides have been on the rise, which is so heartbreaking to me. And I'll do anything that I can to get this message out there, hoping that all of you who are the parents are going to implement more positive changes to protect kids. Again, not that anyone gives their kid a phone with any desire for it to harm their child, but the fact is, it can. And there are kids who are dead because of bullying that happened online and because they had access to their smartphones at all hours of the day and night. And so we really have to be thoughtful about how we can protect our kids from that happening, because none of those kids should be dead. And then we see generally more concerning declines in ambition, creativity, and risk-taking. Kids are more anxious because, again, we're spending less of our time stretching and working the muscles of our brain that force us to go out of our comfort zone, and more time drawn into places that feel very safe online. And that leads to weaker muscles in the brain, weaker muscles about putting yourself out there, and more anxiety. Okay, this was shocking to me. Have you guys heard of this? I hadn't heard of it. It's called phone pinky. And apparently, for kids who get access to smartphones before they hit puberty, in puberty, your bones grow, and then eventually your growth plates at the end of your bones stop growing and they firm up. So kids who've had these smartphones and are holding them like this hours a day for years are seeing permanent indentation in their pinkies and even permanent curvature of their pinkies. So that's just a little scary. Then we're also seeing, more myopia. So it's estimated by 2050, 50% of the world will be myopic. I was pretty much always myopic. I need glasses, but that was just how I was. I'm sure it is worse, or would be worse, if my eyes were still developing, because if we're spending so many hours at a focal point that's just a few feet from our eyeballs, our eyes are going to elongate to accommodate that. So again, this is another reason we want to make sure that our kids are getting outdoors, not just for the physical benefits, but because when you're outside, you're more likely to be focusing at times on things far away, up above, rather than constantly looking down at a 30-degree angle at your hands. All right, so this was the data that Jonathan Haidt saw as a college professor. And really, college professors and college employees, like deans and stuff, they were the canaries in the coal mine about this whole thing. They were noticing that the students coming in around 2012 to 2014 were different than all the freshman classes that had been before. They were much more fragile. If you remember, the news at this point was all about the eggshell kids, how they all needed trigger warnings. They were upset with their professors for talking about things that were stressing them out. And there was a lot of debate about what is wrong with this generation? What's going on? Why can't we have healthy conversations anymore? But this data is kind of shocking, right? Generally, rates of ADHD, they went up a little bit, but not that much. But from 2012 to 2016, psychological disorders, diagnoses of depression and anxiety went up. I know a lot of psychiatrists who work in college and university mental health, and they've seen just such a huge increase in the incidence of these disorders. Likewise, anxiety increases. You see a much greater trend in the increases in anxiety over the last 6 years for young people, Gen Z, versus millennials and Gen X and boomers. So for me, I'm kind of the tail end of Gen X. Oh, I guess my husband is technically a boomer. He's 50. That's funny. I'll tell him today. So we are protected, right? But this generation was not protected. Why? Because they're getting this exposure to all of the whole world of things that can cause you to feel envious, a lot more criticism and shaming and images of how you don't meet some kind of beauty norm or wealth norm or whatever it is, academic norm. They're getting exposed to that so much during the years that their brains are forming and their sense of identity is firming up. And it's causing them to retreat instead of putting themselves out there. And when you retreat, your anxiety gets bigger. So again, I think this is something that we have to be aware of as parents. Like, how can we encourage our kids to constantly be pushing themselves, constantly be pushing outside their comfort zone so that they won't end up with debilitating anxiety? Depression as well. We've seen huge increases in depression in girls and in boys. Overall, the risk for women being depressed is greater than the risk for men. So you'll see the overall numbers here are greater for girls. But overall, the boys have seen a greater percentage increase than the girls. And when it comes to, well, this is non-suicidal self-harm or non-fatal self-harm. So cutting behaviors, this is something that I saw so much in the last 12 years. This is happening all the time with girls. There's so much they're seeing online that's making them feel bad. And then they see kids cutting and then they feel like, oh, maybe that'll work for me. And physical pain can be a focusing, relieving, kind of like a pressure valve on a pressure cooker. It takes off some of the pressure. It takes psychological pain and emotional pain and makes it into something that makes more sense for them. So it's not that they all have a desire to die when they're cutting, but they're using this as a poor coping mechanism. And it's something that you should be aware of and talking to your girls about, especially. And now this is the really scary stuff, the trend in suicides. Suicides are up 134% for girls since 2010 and 109% for boys since 2010. Again, this is why I started the work I do as the parent doctor. This is what I'm so passionate about. This statistic, it's still very rare, of course. These are per 100,000, but it shouldn't be any. And so if you are with me on this, if you want to do everything that you can to prevent this, I really encourage you to spend some time, if not with me, with someone else, some community group, some friend, something, being thoughtful about educating yourself and holding yourself accountable to being the best possible parent that you could be for your kids so that you have these tough conversations and so that they know when they enter adolescence that they can come to you. Naturally, in adolescence, kids want to spend more time with their friends and distance themselves from you, the parent, and it's going to feel like they're pushing you away. But that doesn't mean that you're not still important. There's plenty of data that shows that kids who have a close, involved relationship with their parent fare better in all of these domains. It's actually the most positive predictive factor, the most important positive predictive factor in teens' mental health. So never underestimate, regardless of how your teenager is treating you, the importance of your role as their parent in their life. And really what I do is I support parents to be firm and loving, which is the best parenting strategy. But you can't let yourself feel pushed away to the point that you let go and you become permissive because whatever, they don't want you. That's not true. What they need is your presence and your firm connection with them and involvement. All right. So he talked also about opportunity cost. I think this is huge. It's not just the stuff they're doing online, playing games, social media, whatever. It's not just that is harmful or bad in and of itself. A lot of it is great. A lot of it is fun. But it's the opportunity cost that for every hour our child or that we spend doing those things, we miss out on a social connection, meeting a new friend, learning something new, learning from being face to face with people, how to read emotions, how to understand, how to pick up on nonverbal cues. We really miss out on that. Social deprivation, that's part of it too. Sleep deprivation is huge. I see so many young people who are not sleeping enough, so many young people who have developed the very bad habit of scrolling something like TikTok for hours before they go to bed every night. And I have a 20-year-old patient right now who does this nonstop. So it's something that we have to think about and make sure that we're preparing our kids not to do? Like, how are you going to prevent yourself? Like, there's a lot of dopamine and enjoyment that comes from scrolling social media. What are you going to do to prevent that from becoming a problematic habit for you? And again, before they have the phone, when they're younger and you're talking to them like, hey, I heard that a lot of adults and young adults now just they scroll on their phone for hours before they go to bed looking at like TikTok videos or social media. Like, what do you think about that? Get them, hopefully, to say, that's crazy. I don't want that for myself. So that before they get the phone, they have the identity of, I don't want that to happen. And then hopefully when they get the phone, if there is a slippery slope towards that kind of use, they will be able to catch themselves or come to you and get your advice on how they can prevent that. This is huge. ADHD, young people coming to me as a child psychiatrist saying, I think I have ADHD, is definitely on the rise. But I do think also our ability to pay attention, I notice this in myself. I sit down to do one thing on my computer, then I open an email and that's like, oh yeah, I didn't get back to that person. And then I go down some rabbit hole and before I know it, like I don't even remember why I sat down in the first place. It's really hard to stay focused on digital devices. But there are things that we can do, like turning off notifications on our phone, using grayscale on our phone, using do not disturb on the phone. There are things that we can do to make sure that the digital device, once we get to the phone, is not totally disrupting our ability to pay attention. And again, we have to lead by example and we have to teach our kids that it's very important that they be fierce protectors of their attention and that they build in hours long blocks each week of deep work, focused time, or even just thinking time. If they don't do that with intention, their attention spans will get shorter and shorter. And this is actually being shown with data, and college professors are seeing this as well, that young people are really struggling to pay attention without grabbing their phone. And just there's the behavioral addiction, right? These are dopamine-inducing devices, apps, games, all of these things. It's intermittent reinforcement, right? Like a slot machine. Like when your phone pings, you don't know if it's going to be something great, like a great message, or something bad or something funny. That intermittent reinforcement is the most sure way to become addicted to something. So there's a lot about cell phones that we need to understand can easily have a big impact on our behavior. All right, this is what he recommends that we do collectively as a society. Limit the introduction of a smartphone to all kids until at least high school or age 14. I think that's hard for most people to do still. I think the pendulum still is swinging hopefully backwards. Thankfully, I think kids themselves are becoming more aware that the smartphone and the social media apps are a way for big companies to kind of own them and their attention. And I think there is some pushback now. And there are some kids who are thankful that the schools are preventing the cell phones from being in the classroom. And I actually heard a parent telling me they told their child, no, you can't have TikTok. And now 6 months or a year after their best friends got TikTok, one of the best friends came to them and said, you're so lucky that your parents didn't let you get TikTok, because they feel like it's taken up so much of their time and so much of their life. So again, saying no, and we'll talk more about how to do that. And then even within that, the social media introduction should be later than the smartphone introduction. And personally, I think when you think about the reasons you might give your kids a phone, most of those don't require a smartphone. And thankfully, there are a lot of phones now, like the Bark phone. There's one called like Thule or something. There's the old person phone, the Jitterbug. I actually bought one to use eventually for my mother-in-law, but I'm actually thinking that might be a good family phone when my older child gets to the point of sometimes needing a phone, like at a sleepover or something like that. And then phone-free schools, as I discussed, and making time for independent play. But the big things are that we can control. The age at which we would give our kids a phone should definitely not be sooner than 14. And the age at which we would permit them to have social media would definitely not be before 16. How do you do this, though? Okay, that's all good to know. But when you have a child who's begging you for a phone, or if they already have a phone, like, what do you do now? So this is one lesson, again, of like the 56 that are included in the Unlocking Love course that anyone joining Epic Parenting Group with me next month is going to get access to indefinitely. That's like a self-paced, do-it-yourself, asynchronous learning course. So this is the smartphone decision tree. The first question you want to ask yourself is, can my child handle a smartphone independently and responsibly? Given their current age, their developmental stage, everything I know about my kid, do I think that they could do this? If the answer is no, then your answer is you're going to have to wait a little longer. If the answer is yes, then the next question you need to ask is, Will giving my child a smartphone benefit them, their community, or our family? If the answer is no, then you're going to wait. If it's yes, you'll ask the next question. Does this make sense financially? I include this here because over and over, as a child psychiatrist, I saw a lot of angry parents who felt like their kids were ungrateful, disrespectful because they had given the child a phone. They had agreed to pay for the phone. And now the child wasn't following the parents' rules about the phone. I can promise you, you can have whatever contract you want to have with your kid before you give them the phone. But once you've given your child their first smartphone, you really need to be at the stage, like I said, of letting your teenagers go to the hotel pool by themselves because they have to be ready to handle that responsibly on their own at that point. Otherwise, they shouldn't yet have the phone. And there's other things you can do, which are going to be more time intensive and labor intensive and less pleasant for you. Yes. But like letting them have a social media account on your phone that you let them use sometimes. And then you get to observe what they're doing with it and talk to them about it and all of that stuff. That's a painful step, but I think it's absolutely a necessary step. And the financial consideration also might be, do you even want to be paying for this smartphone? I don't want you to do something that's going to build resentment. And if not, then wait until your kid has a job so they can pay for that smartphone bill themselves. Let them get a flip phone that's a burner that they pay for themselves, whatever it is. But you do not have to give your child a smartphone. It is not a financial duty. It is a benefit, what do you call it? A privilege, not a right of childhood to get a smartphone. Next is safety and awareness. So we talked a little bit in an earlier slide about all of those tough conversations. Have you had enough of those conversations with your child about the risks that can come with online safety, including financial things, right? Presumably, if you give your child a smartphone, now we all pay things with Apple Pay or Google Pay. Do you trust your child with your credit card or your debit card? So make sure that you feel like the answer is yes. If not, then they shouldn't have a smartphone because you're just giving them something that's likely to cause a rupture in your trust further, rather than setting them up for success and use of something that's going to help you feel closer together. Finally, or not finally, but almost finally, online behavior. Have you observed your child's responsible use of social media and messaging, being a good digital citizen, understanding how to respond to people who are rude or bullying or mean or dismissive in chat rooms? Even as adults, we see this all the time, right? People online just do not exhibit the best behavior. So have you given them enough examples to equip them to handle this? If you know Brene Brown, she talks in one of her interviews very vulnerably about after her TED Talk, people put all this cruel stuff out there. Like she's not a super skinny woman. She's not a morbidly obese woman. She's like an average American woman, but people put all this hurtful stuff about her weight after her TED Talk, completely missing all of the valuable stuff she was giving people. And she discusses like her husband and her daughters were like, don't read the comments. She was like, yeah, I won't. And they went away to work and to school. And she sat down and read the comments and she's like devastated. And this is a woman who's like super successful, super competent. Her frontal lobes are totally developed. She's brilliant. And for her, it was devastating to read these things. So just imagine how devastating it's going to be for your 15-year-old daughter or your 16-year-old son to read such hurtful things that people say without thought about them online. We have to make sure that they understand how painful that can be and that they're equipped with some tools to cope with that when it happens. And then finally, make this a child-centered decision. Is this decision primarily for your child's benefit? This question is here to make sure that you're not caving due to peer pressure. Like, do you really think this is the right decision for your child at this point in time? Again, when it comes to handling the pressure from your kids, the advice I would give you is let them know you want them to have a smartphone. I want my kids to have a smartphone, and I'm sure you do too. I want them to be young adults who can use a smartphone responsibly, not be addicted to it, not be hurt by it, and to be able to use it for all the good that it can bring. I absolutely want that. And then lay out with them what the plan is. And it shouldn't be like, when you've shown me I can trust you. That's too vague. It needs to be very specifically like, these things need to happen. First, I would be giving you my credit card, and you would be using that when you're out with your friends for 6 to 12 months. And if you do that responsibly and there's no issues with spending, same with using my credit card on your iPad or your computer, then I'll know that that's one of the things that would help me know that you're to be trusted with a smartphone that also has my credit card on there, for example. But there's so many similar conversations that you'll have to have. And in my course, in my work with parents, I help you really go through this step by step. All right, so this is what I teach in the Empowered Parents courses and classes in the office hours that I do monthly and in my inner circle. It's 4 pillars. It's 1, defining direction, empowering you to be the CEO of your family, thinking about what are your family's values? What is your mission statement? What are the goals that you have for your child in the next 6 to 12 months? But also, where do you want them to be by the time they're 18, off in the world on their own? The idea here is that we create a really strong bond with our kids, but not one that's overbearing, one that is flexible and dynamic and can withstand a lot of distance, but also pull us back together anytime that it's needed. Second is emotion regulation. And this is your own emotion regulation as a parent, not just your kid's emotion regulation. As a child psychiatrist, people would bring their kids to me all the time asking me, like, please, can you teach my kids some skills? They're 12, 14, 15, and they're behaving like they're 2 years old. Well, really, I think almost all of us as adults can work on our own emotion regulation skills. Being a parent is hard, and our kids trigger us, and it can feel like an emotional roller coaster. And especially in adolescence, our kids, because they are pushing us away and they're testing our limits and they're trying on new identities for themselves, can really trigger us. So learning what works for you to help you regulate your own emotional state in response to your kids' triggers is absolutely key. And this part of what I teach parents is not just helpful for you in your relationship with your child or children, but also really helpful for you in your relationship with yourself, with your partner if you have one, with your family members, with your coworkers, because people who have good emotion regulation are generally better liked, better trusted. I mean, think about it. I'm sure in your own life, some adults who blow up at things, go off the handle, and we even know some political people who are really big, right? Like people with big personalities are one thing, but people with very limited emotion regulation are hard to be around and just not that pleasant. So really working on that for ourselves. And if you don't have great emotion regulation yet, that doesn't mean that you can't learn it. This is totally a learnable skill, but I can't tell you do A, B, and C and you'll have great emotion regulation. I can just give you a menu and you're going to have to test from that menu what works for you through trial and error. So that's what I do with the parents I coach. Third is embracing failure. What does this mean? It means recognizing that in order to be successful and to persevere, we have to strengthen our ability to be okay with failing. And we have to really teach our kids to celebrate failure, to ask them, what did you fail at today? What did you try at? I'll give you an example. My son ran his final cross-country race yesterday. He, like his parents, is not a very fast runner. So in his age group, he wasn't the last kid in the race. But I mean, he did a respectable 9-minute something mile for 2 miles. But among the kids in his school, he was the last one. So he really felt like he failed himself. His goal was to do under 9-minute miles, and he missed that by 18 seconds. And he was crying and beating himself up. And I let him feel those feelings. And then we talked about the fact that, really, though, this is great because this is an analogy for everything in life. Anytime you're trying something new, you're going to be able to focus on other people who do it faster, better, bigger. They're farther in that path than you are. And it's going to feel tempting to just give up and say, it's not for me. I can't do this. But the reality is, if we can embrace, this is where I'm at, this is where I want to be, and I'm going to try this, and it's not going to work. And I'll try this instead, and it's not going to work. And I'll try this instead. And eventually, if you keep going and you don't stop, you will succeed. People who have self-compassion and keep going and embrace the failures along the way are more likely to be successful in life. So we can do this with our kids by talking to them about our own personal failures on the way to our own successes and using examples, and there are plenty, from famous people, from history, about people who failed before they succeeded. Oftentimes, especially in our country, especially on social media, we just see the end result. We just see the success. And we really need to have more conversations about all the struggles and failures that come before that so that kids have a better, more holistic view of how things happen. And finally, but definitely not least, is practicing gratitude. This means not just being thankful for what you have, but really taking moments each day to feel grateful for the life that you are living. And there are many ways, again, like a menu, that you can practice this with your own family. I'm sure you'll be teaching me, as other parents have taught me, the things that work for your family. There's no limit to what you could do here, but this is absolutely essential. Practicing gratitude improves your joy and your happiness, and it's a key to having a good, healthy, happy life. So if you are interested in joining the next Empowered Parent Inner Circle Epic group, it's going to be starting November 6th. Our meetings are on Wednesdays. Your relationship with your child will reap the rewards for years to come. What you get if you join is 6 weekly group Zoom calls, which will be limited to no more than 6 parent dyads, a private WhatsApp group just for your community, just for your group. And this is a really great way for you to meet new parents who are like-minded, to get support from them, to make friends. You get 2 one-on-one calls with me to make a plan specific for your family, and access to that 8 weeks of pre-recorded content. That course is called Unlocking Love. It was sold previously for $5,000, but you get that infinitely forever access to look at and read and watch on your own. There's workbooks for each week. It really takes you step by step on a path that's going to help you connect better with your kids. You also get ongoing access to 6 months of office hours. These are calls like this one, an hour with me where I talk about a topic. You and the other participants suggest the topics, and those replays are available for you indefinitely. And you'll get a customized, beautiful family mission statement that you can print and display at home. So all of this costs $24.97. These are the dates on Wednesdays. The time is going to depend. Normally I do this at 10 a.m., but if I have enough people interested, I may group people. Like, I'd rather have a group of people whose kids are like 5 to 12 and another group of people whose kids are teenagers rather than having everyone all together. So we'll see who joins. The replays will be available, of course, but live participation is recommended. You can text me if you have any questions. If you're not sure if it's for you, if you want to talk about it with your partner, please go to booking.theparentdoctor.com/30 and you can book a free 30-minute consultation with me. And if you'd like to get on the wait list, this is no commitment required, but you would go to theparentdoctor.com/epic waitlist, put in your information there, and I'll reach out to you to get in touch. If you join with a friend, you'll both get $500 off. And if you've read the book Atomic Habits, you also know that having an accountability partner, a buddy, someone that you're saying, I'm going to do this, will you do it with me, increases the chances that each of you will see benefit by 8-fold, because it increases your chances of doing the thing, whether that's committing to an exercise routine or weight loss or becoming a better parent. It really greatly improves your chances of success. So I encourage you, if you're considering this, to find a friend, talk to them about it, and reach out to me. Thank you all so much for being here. Any questions? All right, guys. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you being here live. I look forward to seeing you at future events, and hopefully you're all on my newsletter list so you get the information when these webinars are going to be coming out. The cohort for Epic, I'm launching this one now towards the end of the year, and it will happen again next year too. So if this is not the right time for you, you might want to do it in the future. No worries, but just let me know if you're interested so I can kind of keep you up to date in the future. Thank you all so much for joining. Bye.